It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. All right, it's happening. Another podcast. Welcome, everybody. Today with us, we have Peter Lawrence, as always.
Hi there.
And Molly Doyle is joining us.
Woohoo! Hello.
And Nick Bruecken. How are you doing,
everybody?
Nick?
I'm great. How
Thank
are
you
you
for joining us, everybody. You guys did a panel event on the 7th for MNTech about SaaS being possibly dead or dying.
Is it going to die?
Is it going to die
Is
and
it
be
gonna die?
replaced
That was the
by
question.
It's a good hook.
secret
Real
agents?
good hook.
Yeah. So, Molly, do you want to tell us kind of what you talked about a little bit?
Yeah, and why did we speculate on such a crazy
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah. What's your problem?
Right. Well, I bumped into an article from the internet, and Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, had said in a podcast that he anticipated that the demise of SaaS was on the horizon because when you look at all the intelligence layer of SaaS systems, the business logic, the automations and the workflows, all of that could exist in AI. And so the risk or opportunity is, our company is going to take the time and look at the cost benefit of replacing some of those expensive licenses and their investment in a SaaS, particularly for SaaS, maybe that's maybe not meeting their needs, right? And so could this create some disruption in the market? So I got really curious and just wanted to do a little deep dive into like how likely is this? This could be, frankly, an opportunity for STG because we do a lot of custom application development. So if companies are looking to move away from SaaS and go build new things, hey, that could be something for us to kind of hunt. So I got interested, and there's not a lot of agreement for his speculation, to be honest, but I'm a marketing person, so I rode the wave. I rode the curiosity wave, and we submitted the topic to the MNTech folks, and they said, "Yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about that." So that's where it started.
So the straw man was assembled, built up, set up ready to go.
That's right.
Or how did you vote at the end? How do you decide where everybody comes down on it?
Are you jumping ahead to the end
We
of the book?
did.
I was going to say, do we want to hold on that one and
Well,
save
I
it
just
for
want to know if
later?
you did
There
vote.
is
You don't
an
have to come-
answer, and it was unanimous.
Oh,
There's,
Yeah.
there's
Okay.
your teaser. Come back
Okay.
next time. You'll hear
Wow.
We'll
about
Yeah.
come
it.
back to it then.
I'm staying here for
as
the
a-
whole podcast.
Yeah, parting thoughts. We'll hit that maybe a little early, give it more time. So exactly what can SaaS be replaced with? So software as a service, everything we use is in the cloud, Microsoft 365,
Right.
and just products like for whiteboarding and things like that, design. Which of
Email.
those are we talking about here? We have
Yeah, when's my
CRM
email going away?
systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was an important part of the conversation and what sort of got illuminated for me, really through the experts that we assembled versus anything that I read. I felt like the experts did a really good job of saying, yeah, maybe only in these circumstances. And then they pointed to some of the use cases that they were admiring for their own company. One of them, Jenna Zangs, the chief data and analytics officer, was talking about an app that they use where it's a niche, and I don't want to say too much about the workflow because I don't want to get the vendor upset if I'm exposing something, but there's a very niche problem that piece of SaaS was solving, and it was an extra license, and they were having to do a lot of hooks and tricks to get it integrated with their overall systems. And so that was one that was sort of being evaluated to say, is this something that we could do better if we built our own? What would that take for us to do? And then, we'd save this licensing fee. Is that worth doing, right? And so this sort of cost benefit analysis that I think will percolate up, and the panel kind of agreed that should percolate up, particularly for those niche vendors. And then the gentleman, Jeff Einhorn from Thrivent, he's the newly promoted CTO of Thrivent. He was also on the panel, and he talked about similarly, they're doing some deep dives to look at that cost benefit analysis. Where could we build instead of continuing to buy, and where's there some potential opportunity? And I was frankly a little bit nervous trying to even assemble this panel because I thought, are people even at work on this, or is this just actually silly, right? Is this just silly, sensational,
Right.
futuristic mumbo jumbo? But they are genuinely running cost benefit analysis on existing SaaS products. Then this distinction, this sort of bifurcation of, yeah, but not the big ones, right? Nobody's looking to replace Salesforce or, Microsoft Dynamics or, really where those core data systems are. And I think that's, maybe a really important sort of conditional constraint is like, wow, those systems are already investing to build their own leverage of AI, and they're going to do an incredible job, way more than any individual company could do. Nick, did you hear about the same thing?
Yeah, and I think one other thing that was of note is, I mean, the cost benefit analysis. There was a lot of conversation about cost and about the expense of running AI, even if it could do it, is it worth it?
Right.
And so I think where a lot of people are landing right now is that it isn't. Even if it could, it's still so expensive and it's so sort of uncharted territory that there's still a lot of space for SaaS, for startup to establish, a foothold into some solutions. And there's always the future of what AI might bring, but we're very much in the infancy of it. So it is interesting that they're always, already kind of looking at it, but there is a scale that just automatically sort of removes it from
We haven't
being a
even
viable option right now.
we haven't even fired up 3 Mile Island or built enough nuclear reactors to power all this stuff.
That is a constraint. That's a serious
Yeah.
constraint.
Yeah.
The other constraint, which I now am very curious about, and so I'll just bring it up to you technical experts, because it's beyond me to understand, but one of the constraints that was brought up was around, there's these pilots, and even if they're really interesting and compelling, nobody, and I think this was Michael from Boston Scientific who said nobody has delivered agentic AI. So automated business process workflows that make their own decisions. Nobody has delivered that at an enterprise scale. It's on a very small user base. It's with maybe 10 different users, that kind of a thing. And so when you look at an enterprise like Boston Scientific, right, what is the, again, cost benefit analysis, but even what's the technical capacity to deliver agentic workflows across the entire enterprise? It just kind of starts to fall down.
Well, not only that, but I think there's still a lack of trust in AI solutions and AI responses in many cases, right? That there was the huge push with ChatGPT, but then there was also the hallucinations and things like that. And nobody, I mean, it's okay to have a software bug, but have a software bug that you can't do anything about or get out of your system. I don't think anybody's ready for that leap just yet, but there's, there's certainly a lot of other machine learning and other kinds of tech that are working and are being used in customers and clients right now.
MNTech has a project or product, robotic process automation, that kind of watches you go through your processes and figures out ways that it can automate them and do them for you, like the repeatable things that you do through your workday.
Right.
I see
so
AI
much more accessible. RPA,
I see AI, agents. It's like, what is an agent? Well, it's somebody that does things for you that you don't really want to do. I don't want to book my travel. It just makes it easier. I just want to say, get me to this place and I need to stay there for this long and then come back. And then it all just happens. So, it's like organize all my data.
Talk about AI
in a manner
agents
I
or
can
travel
understand.
agents, Kyle?
I think we're there.
But what you're pointing to, Kyle, is an agent, right? That's a discrete function. And agentic is really, how do we string those agents together or build an entire workflow that it makes its own decisions? It's like an autonomous vehicle, right? There's multiple inputs and it's making its own decisions and driving an actual outcome. And that was another place where the opportunity to replace SaaS kind of falls down, where the panelists were saying, what's the workflow that we could possibly build that would have a good enough ROI and a minimal enough risk that we
Right.
would want to do, right? Agentic, where, no person in the loop and an actual outcome. And so, I just think the opportunities for that, particularly in an enterprise scale with the big companies that were on our panel, were just very, very limited. But I do think that, maybe one of the best outcomes in terms of now what from the panel was, if I were running a small niche SaaS company, I would see this as a potential risk and a threat, and start to look at how would I incorporate my product offering into a broader set so that I'm maybe a little more protected from the risk that I could be replaced by somebody building their own agentic. For me, that was the most immediate takeaway of the session.
Or
Yeah, I
even
did
to
get
start
this.
incorporating. Go ahead, Nick.
No, you finish. That's fine.
I was going to say even to maybe to the point where that small SaaS would want to bring in AI themselves and
Yes.
add more power and more punch to their product.
I think
Good
that's
point.
just it, Peter. I do feel like there is a sense of established SaaS versus new might have a different modeling,
Yeah.
as it were. And this feels like very visionary right now, and they're trying to figure out, is there a reality to it? And so we're just kind of in that first space. So it's been,
Yep.
but
Yeah,
it
you're
certainly
right.
was topical.
Futuristic, yes. Yeah, we filled the room. The room was full. I was so
Yeah.
nervous because we had a big, I don't know, 150 person room or something. I was like, we maybe could have had a smaller space, but we almost filled it. It was pretty awesome.
Nice.
One of the things that Matt Lysing, who was also on our panel, our very own SDG Managing Director of Engineering, he said that one of the opportunities that he sees is, with SaaS, enterprise grade SaaS, right? What are the opportunities to connect behind? Like he doesn't think there's any risk that anybody's going to replace Salesforce, but maybe there's an opportunity for people to keep those CRMs with big ERP systems, but build agentic that leverages those data silos and gets behind them in a way that gives us a little more workflow. And I thought there's got to be some compelling use cases there, right? Like, give me this data out of my SAP system and then do the analysis and send the update to Bob and then update this PowerPoint. Like, just do that every Monday, right?
I kind of see the easiest entry point into like a low code product that's already has all of the kind of features and functionality built in,
Yeah.
and then all the documentation out there on how to do everything that you can feed your agent, and then you just build workflows by saying, I need a form, this is the information I want, I need it to be active from these dates to this date, here's the rules behind it,
Yeah.
and can you create that for me? And the
I
agent
appreciate
would
you
say,
bringing that
no,
up.
I'm not doing
Yeah.
it. No, it would, there you go.
Yeah.
It's a personal assistant in that case. And I see agentic AI as every SaaS platform having a assistant that will help you use it. I see that more happening more likely than replacing it.
Is-
That's interesting.
Can I
That's
ask a silly
exposing.
question?
Yeah.
Always.
From a non-technology, I'm in the leadership practice, right? Delivery. But when it comes to, so what's the difference between, would that be an agentic AI, like a system of AIs, or would it be AI?
Is it just automation? This is where I get a
Can
little
I even
tripped up.
categorize it that way?
Well,
like what?
the idea is that the agentic AI, the agent, is autonomous, like can do things to add on to what you need. Like, you wouldn't need to know all the things to ask. Maybe it knows all the things that you need to ask, and it can ask you the questions and then do the things for you. It can sit there and look at the way you work and then say, hey, I can help you do this. Would you like me to? And then that paperclip pops up and
I was thinking
Yeah.
Jarvis, Kyle, not clipping and
yeah.
I do wonder, Kyle, you're bringing up, just process automation, right? There's a lot of really robust tools and capabilities in process automation, and you get your single pane of glass and you can just put the data connectors behind. So I do hope that customers are being conscientious about, maybe it doesn't have to be all this sexy new stuff. It could just be robotic process automation, or it could be business process automation, or it could be just workflow optimization through low code. Um, but maybe these use cases that are bubbling up will give them an opportunity to kind of reconsider what are the solutions that they could be applying to this business use case, and maybe not just looking at agentic, but looking at all the potential ways to solve for that.
Well, and
Yeah,
another thing that they spoke about is the data available to even allow the agent to know
Right.
enough. And when we're talking about replacing workflows and things of that nature, how much of that data is available to learn and
Yeah.
understand exception criteria and things of that
Yeah.
nature. So there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's a lot riding on some of these things, and like how much is at stake? How much do you trust an AI to manage your pricing for your manufacturing plant
Right.
that makes a billion parts and they hallucinate
Yeah.
and you take an order,
Yeah. I mean, part of
and
the
it's
architecture has
you
to
only
be.
charge half the price, and all of a sudden you just lost $5 million because AI, was wrong.
That would suck. Yeah, part of the architecture, and I thought Jenna spoke to this really effectively. Part of the architecture for any AI solution has to include incredible amounts of validation and verification. And so that just adds to the cost of architecture. If you have to build
Right.
all that in and engineer for all that, and of course you do, right?
Yeah.
So, it really does add to the potential cost. Which I think then again makes it like, yeah, just focus on the little ones that you could maybe knock off with just, not a whole lot of validation, just building a new, low risk kind of something that you could replace.
Right.
One of the areas
Well,
that I have to assume would be ripe would be warehouse systems, right? You've got tons of decisions that need to be made based on product movement, based on change in vendors, based on change in pricing, based on whatever, right? And so I could see a lot of use cases in that space. That seems like one where, yeah, you're right. There's risk if you get it wrong. So you have to build the validations, but there's just such a high volume of detailed things that need to happen very quickly all the time.
Yeah.
It seems like that would be a good space.
Did you get?
Go ahead.
No, you, Peter. I've done this 3 times now.
That's all right. I don't mind. You're the guest. Okay, so I think cost and risk are always going to be drivers in this space. I also think what you're talking about, Molly, with testing is another huge impact. I know we see it with software projects where just regular developers are developing regular code. Testing is not number one priority on anything, right? That's not like there aren't as many test-driven development clients as you would hope to see, right? Like you'd hope 100% of everybody wants perfectly working code, test first,
Yeah.
test-driven, all of that. And oftentimes test as an afterthought, testing as a user acceptance testing, and that should be good enough. We'll probably make it. I mean, Microsoft's famous for buy after, revision 1, whatever comes next, we'll be ready to go because
testing
all
through
the
user experience.
Good advice for new model cars too, for the record.
that's probably another one where a lot of changes have happened and they've done as much testing as they can, but they don't get all the bugs out because new cars are complicated machines.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I've been curious. I think that'd be a great topic for another podcast. Is just what does testing look like, or what does it need to look like in the age of AI? You've got all these code creators, right?
Mhm.
Tools that can do all the work. You've got all these code testers that can test your code and show you where your errors are. Well, how do you test the test? Because you didn't build it, right? So,
Yeah.
and then what about all the good discipline that also needs to be there around system integration and performance and scalability? And when Jenna brought up that comment about, oh no, it was Michael from Boston Scientific brought up the concern about enterprise scale, I thought, oh gosh, how would you even test for that? How would you test that your model doesn't start to fail for some reason when you're scaling it up to, massive concurrency?
I mean, the same way we tested back in the day of the web, first, starting out. When it starts breaking, it's not scaled well enough.
That's a really bad answer. Well,
That's
hope you'd have a test environment, right? And you do some scaling, right?
you sure.
Throw some load.
Peter doesn't test in prod.
No,
Not anymore.
no. I have good development and staging environments, which is
Nice.
amazing.
I think
Good
developers should be the only people that test their code. That's funny. Yes. No, I think that the QA
And
piece
we're
of
done.
it,
That's what we're teaching the models.
knowing if it's good or not, there's no choice but to test and to QA, and it's either. And how do you do that with an AI? And how do you get an AI to do that? And what about the human element?
Yeah.
Is it going to understand that? Well, yeah, you could supply this 6,000 page how-to and assume they're going to, read it in a week and there's human limitations and missing out on human creativity.
Yeah.
Because it's an AI doing it. Maybe there were some innovation opportunities that could have happened. So I think having that, it's like we have to be the training wheels for this thing. And I don't know how long it's going to learn to ride that bike.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm like.
Weird thing about me is I ran a consulting company for 12 years that focused on software testing. And so I've just been curious about, what does testing look like for AI? So every once in a while, I'll just ask somebody that I think should know and really kind of be a leading edge on this. And I'm not getting great answers. But one of the answers I have gotten is that there's a lot of A/B because it's almost impossible to test for all the scenarios and even understand what was even created. So let's just run a parallel test of current system and desired future system and just make sure we get the same result. And while that's one approach, it's certainly you got to know that you've put all the inputs in that could create any variance and create any edge cases and create any discrepancy and all the different ways that users are going to use the thing that you don't expect them to do. And so I just think that the risk that's being introduced by not having well-defined quality management practices for AI, at least I haven't found them. I haven't done a ton of research, but I'm not seeing it. Are you guys seeing it?
This sounds like a subject for somebody on our QA team.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm wondering what,
Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody's posting articles about that.
No, exactly. I haven't seen anything either. I mean, I haven't seen anything beyond just test automation, but what does that mean in AI? And that's a good topic.
Yeah.
Did you get the sense, Molly, that during the conversation that is SaaS going to die, that it was more of a reflection of replacing existing SaaS with AI versus I'm going to build my new software as a service tool with agentic AI and start from scratch with it? Because I don't feel like that was really touched on. It was more of a preservation of what's existing and the likelihood of it being replaced versus it might be replaced differently,
Yeah.
Well,
I think Jenna was hinting at that for St. Thomas, talking about these niche SaaS that they've purchased that they may, they're literally looking at, could we just build our own, and maybe not even leveraging agentic specifically, but just, is it something that we now have tool sets that are available because of AI that just make it so much easier for us to create our own. Interesting. I was sitting with a friend yesterday who said she built an application in 4 hours. And I said, oh, really? Show me. And she did. And the complexity and the sophistication of this app, they won an award yesterday for this app that she created in 4 hours. And it was all using, AI tools. And so just the barrier to entry to create your own applications, it's got to be very disruptive. It's not really answering the question around agentic and what does that introduce, but I think
kind of is. It's teasing. It might start out as not agentic, but as you prototype something and find out it's doable, and then all of a sudden you have all these other ideas for it. It could turn into something like that. And somebody in the audience actually spoke about doing that as well. So this is not an uncommon situation. And I think our own Chad Jutner maybe even has had an example of these things. So it's certainly
Oh, sorry. I was expecting part of the conversation to go to, and I about the barriers here, but if you've got Salesforce, you already have the ability to connect through API, right? To
Yep.
do all kinds of back-end integrations. So what's the barrier now to leveraging agentic for workflow automation, right? Why not keep Salesforce and build your own internal workflows? There's really no reason why you'd want to get rid of Salesforce unless it was truly just not meeting your needs. And so I'm excited about the potential for people to keep your little data silos, but now start to get them to touch each other using backends, beyond system integration, actual workflow automation using logic of agentic tools. Isn't
Yeah,
that the point?
well, sure. But the other question comes to mind is, when were these systems, like Salesforce hasn't been around for 100 years?
Feels like
Um,
it.
it does, but only because you've used it enough. But,
Life
you know,
before
and
Salesforce.
and a lot of these software as a service providers have come around in the last 10 to 20 years, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
businesses have spent a lot of money to get off of mainframes, for example, to get onto these other systems, or
Yeah.
to get off of one system to another, right? And
Right.
maybe we're just at sort of that lull of, well, it's working for us right now. We're not gonna reinvest, you know,
Yeah.
tens of millions of
Hmm.
dollars right now to replace this SaaS.
Yeah.
But maybe maybe we'll keep an eye on it for when it gets AI gets good enough.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
do think that's kind of I think that's a good point, Peter, because I think a lot of it is if we don't start getting ahead of it right now and aware of it, we can't pivot fast enough if something comes along in the marketplace that competes with us to replace it
Right.
with it. And so I think
Right.
that's the motivating circumstance, but it has to balance out with their current financials and resources and capabilities. And so I think it's a testament to the statement that the Microsoft CEO said that it's possible, and so people are starting to react because you don't want to just say this isn't going to happen and be done
Uh-huh.
because all of a sudden something's going to run right up on your tail and you won't be ready to pivot quick enough. So there is probably a competitive edge to it that needs to be assessed and understood.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think there's going to be some kind of a catalyzing moment where we see something amazing that has been created and what it's doing and the outcome of that gets everybody fired up. And, you know, they're starting to, I mean, they're developing and I think they already are doing this is like self-validating, self-testing models. And, when agents can do that and improve themselves and validate themselves, then the training wheels come off and
Reliably is the
reliably.
key,
Yes.
and then we
Yeah.
get back to that question of how do we trust that what it's doing is actually
Yeah.
effective.
Well,
Um,
and more reliably than humans,
yeah.
by a factor of I don't know how much, but it's just like self-driving cars. Like,
Yeah.
well, they're already better than we are, but we still had one accident happen last year. So they're not quite there yet. They got to be twice as good as we are, three times as good as we are.
It
Um,
is it is a different scale or a different like think of the litigation and things of that nature too. You mentioned an earlier one where all of a sudden AI accidentally sells 1 million parts for half the price because of a simple error. Well, what are the ramifications to that, and what other errors and security and privacy stuff that
Yeah.
we're trusting this machine to do?
Yeah.
What kind of contract language is needed? And, from a consultancy perspective, what is our responsibility to ensure we're implementing these things in
Ethically.
good faith and
Yeah.
stuff like that? So we're pivoting out of this conversation now into something broader, but all of those things did kind of get brought up in this panel
Yeah.
because it is it's one thing to say we can do it. It's another thing to say it should be done. And
Yeah.
um, And so I think
You
that's
know,
kind of where things were.
Dick, you brought up the risk of just making sure that you're aware of the market. If you're a provider of SaaS and just the potential that you could be outmoded if you don't pay attention. I do also hope that these big SaaS companies take note and maybe don't get so aggressive on their pricing because they're implementing these new features and benefits, and that's all well and good, but sometimes these price hikes are 9%, 12%, and some of these big enterprise customers are just going to say, we'll build our own. Like it just gets kind of nutty at some point. And so I do think that's one of the potential opportunities of agentic AI is if these big SaaS companies get a little too big for their britches and the pricing starts to get out of line. It's good that we as an industry could potentially have a competitive opportunity to build our own. What would that look like?
Yeah.
It brings up a good point. These new features come out on a platform, and the assumption is that everybody's going to get more value out of it. Now that they have this, it's worth way more. Let's price it
Right.
that way. And then you have like companies that won't use those features. And it's
Mhm.
like, well, it was extra. If you wanted it, it was an extra price, but now we've rolled it in.
Yeah.
And now we're jacking the price up by 15% because
Yeah.
of all this value.
Yeah.
There's a piece of Salesforce called Einstein, which is automating business intelligence, but we don't operate, Salesforce the way that, out of the box. And a lot of this stuff is assuming, it's built for out of the box.
Yeah.
So a lot of the customizations you're doing, it's like, well, we're not going to get anything out of that. And what was a separate license, is that going to be added on? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, we see the value of all this. It's like, well, we don't use all of this. And then it's like, what's your willingness to take your business elsewhere? How far can they push you?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, even just for our own internal operations, right? We've been looking to kind of rationalize, well, how many different ways do we need to chat? And where do we want to store documents and all the different note-taking apps, right? Slack wants to take notes, Teams wants to take notes, Salesforce wants to take notes, Revenue Grid wants to take notes. Which one
OneNote
wins,
wants to take
right?
notes.
And what's that?
OneNote wants to take
And
notes
OneNote wants
for
to take
those
I don't want to take notes.
Gen
So
Xers.
great, and I still can't find my notes. It's like but yeah, I think everybody's innovating, but as a customer of all that innovation, it gets a little overwhelming, and we may have made an operational decision that we're going to leverage this channel for communications, and we're going to leverage this app for notes, and we're going to and so yeah, as they introduce new features and benefits, it might not be a benefit for us. We may have already covered that with functionality from a different product, and so these price jacks could outmode some of these SaaS providers if they're not careful.
Yeah, it's complicated equation, that's for sure, to just try to decide and because they have to provide that AI value in,
Yeah.
right? Because customers are clamoring for AI because they read a lot of ChatGPT articles in 2023.
Right.
Does
And
it feel like kind of the mobile app space from the, teens, like where everybody wanted a mobile app because it was
yeah.
you know what I mean? Even though it didn't really serve their maybe core function or purpose, but it was just sort of like we got to have a presence there. And then everybody realized, oh, we really didn't need a full mobile app. What's the other thing called? A progressive web app or something could be, a better use to have a presence. But
Yeah, and
I don't know, but I'm just curious if there's any parallels.
well, and that jump started, responsive design, where it has to work on all platforms. It has to resize, it has to reorganize, and those kind of things. And because phones brought that out, if it wasn't for different size screens and the need for a really small screen, like you could handle web browsers, that could resize and you could change and all that. But when it had to go on this little thing, it changed. That was kind of that catalyzing moment.
I will tell you, I just signed up for jury duty, and I almost just filled out the paper form because the experience on the phone was
Oh,
so painful.
yes.
And I'm like, well, I could go down to my computer, but I really don't feel like it because it's just jury duty. And like, and that's
Yeah.
probably why they haven't changed the form, is because it's just jury duty. So, but it still hurts.
They weren't prioritizing the customer experience.
They were not. There's no
You're not a customer.
responsiveness.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not that's not a competitive market.
Yeah. Yeah. Which
Everybody's
brings
in
us
that
back to-
market.
Right. Which brings us back to use
We don't have to
cases. You would
serve
hope
you.
that the business need should drive the experience and the
Right.
process, right? And reminds me, one of the really cool use cases that was brought up during the panel was from Thrivent, talking about, is there an opportunity for agentic AI to provide value to customers who for whatever reason aren't in a position to leverage a financial services provider, meaning maybe they don't have a big enough portfolio, or they just don't want to work with a human. They'd
That's right.
rather share their data with a technology tool. And so being able to build an agentic AI agent that could help somebody make financial decisions, that's very interesting, right? That's data in, data out, analysis, right? There's all kinds of reasons why that could be a viable use for agentic.
Yeah, that was a really good example as well.
Customer support is another one where, we've all experienced those ridiculous little chat tools, and most of them are just annoying and unhelpful, and they make you follow their menu of how you should think.
Which one of these 4 problems don't you have? And I can't go forward until you
always
pick
like,
one
other.
of these.
Need an operator.
Yeah, there's no other.
Give me a person.
Can't do that. No.
Oh my God.
So probably the name agentic is probably part of where that comes from, right? Is having that agent replaced by someone that can help guide a little bit more easily and a little bit more directly, and
Yeah.
catch on
Yeah.
with that.
That makes sense. And again, and this is just such a weird nuance, but AI agent leveraged into workflow is when it becomes agentic, and so that workflow automation and decision making, not just processing a discrete function. And so again, I'm back to, like, where would you want it to go very far? I just don't think we're there yet, but it's exciting. Maybe there's
How much
potential.
of your portfolio would you turn over to an agentic AI today?
Right? Yeah, here's all my
All of
data.
it.
Here's all my investments. Now go optimize my portfolio. Go change my
optimize.
allocations. Yep.
Do
change
some.
my allocations.
I got $2,000 in my account. Like, make me a millionaire.
Make you
Let's
a
go.
millionaire. Yeah.
Let's do this
Set
thing.
spending limits on my.
Yeah. What happens if
account.
it loses you a bunch of money? So what was the wrap up? What was the consensus?
Oh, well, let me ask you
yeah.
this first. On a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel? What do you think? Is agentic AI going to replace SaaS?
No, it's going to enhance it.
Yeah, it's a tool. It will be
One-
used as a piece of it.
1 to 5, gentlemen. 1 to
What's
5.
1 and what's 5?
5 is absolutely it's going to replace it. 1 is
2.
no way.
2.
Kyle?
I'm going to split the difference. I'm going to go 3.
Ah.
$1.
Yeah, $1. Don't overbid. Molly, do you want to share
I'm gonna say 3. I think it's gonna be a real threat to the niche SaaS.
Okay.
Yeah.
The panel all said 2 right now, based on right now. Now, they were also, they do see that that's a snapshot in time, of course.
Right.
But,
Of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was kind of the consensus that it became. Yeah. And the conversation became more about, what we talked about today, which is less about it's going to kill SaaS and more it's going to, enhance it. And then there are other market,
that's
variables
like
that'll-
asking the panel, on what day will electric cars have replaced all gas cars in daily driving?
Wednesday. Not this
Nope.
a Wednesday in the future, but that's my
It'll be a
guess.
Wednesday.
It will be a Wednesday.
I need a date.
Yeah, but that was just a silly way to kind of tie the knot on the whole conversation.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
and like SaaS covers so many different things. So to say it's replacing SaaS, it's
Mhm.
like we're replacing vehicles with this new, version of a Hyundai. It's like, what about trucks? What about planes? What about, yeah.
Yeah.
What, so, what's the low hanging fruit, I guess, right now? Chat agents?
Well, I, I
You're saying
think
in
there's a
terms of getting access to agentic, like how do you get started?
Yeah, like where's this gonna all kind of start up?
well, some of
I
it
don't,
already exists. I mean, I think a self-driving car
Yeah.
is an agentic
Yeah.
system. I think we talked about intelligent warehousing is another one.
Yeah.
So some of it, but those are also, I think, specific products that are an example of here's how we can achieve this using this
Yeah.
technology versus replace an existing established model.
Yeah.
but what that brought was features as a service. If you want this upgrade, if you want this part of your car to work,
Do you
if
want
you want
heated
heated
seats?
seats, you have to subscribe to heated seats.
Or
But
maybe
isn't
they
that
built
just
it.
kind of capitalism at play here? I mean,
Yeah,
there's so many systems now. I think Molly referenced to all the notes and all the places you can do chat. Those are almost table stakes for certain, for
Right.
basically any collaboration tool. You have to have
Yeah.
those things. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to convert somebody from an existing
Yeah.
system.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that within existing SaaS models, there's going to be opportunities for agentic AI to be used to establish a foothold in a certain feature set that works in conjunction with the rest of the service
Yeah.
and then be a startup version
Yeah.
of it as well, is what it kind of
Oh.
sounds like.
Yeah, that was another interesting sliver of the conversation was around startups and how, if you're building a SaaS product now, you really need to be conceptualizing that as an AI built product, or you're probably just taking too long to get to market. But also that then you're opening yourself up to, really great scalability in the future to leverage all the technology as it continues to evolve. And so there was some really great conversation about advising startups to really kind of AI first in the building of your product.
Yeah, and I mean, even I think one of the panelists, works at a college, a university, and some of their students are already kind of tapping into that. So the next generation
Yeah.
of engineers upon us with their good friend and agentic AI
Yeah.
friend,
I think
pal.
there's a big piece in healthcare
Yep.
with
Yeah.
intake and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're out of time. So, any quick parting thoughts before we shut her down?
It's fun to stay on top of the trends. Thanks for being a part of the conversation.
Yeah.
I think we covered it all, and agentic AI can be put to bed.
Yeah,
No, I'm just kidding.
we're good. Two.
Two.
That's
The
our
answer is
decision.
2. And Wednesday.
Yes,
And Wednesday.
it'll be on a Wednesday.
Yep.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining
This
us.
was great. Appreciate
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks everybody. With that, I think we'll say goodbye.
Bye,
it.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.